What's up, everyone? We're back for another week of Locked On Bucks. Justin's with me to start the week, and we don't exactly have a great game to talk about. The Bucks completely blown off the floor by the Denver Nuggets. This game was ugly. It wasn't close. I don't know where that ranks, Justin, in terms of biggest losses they've had in recent times. I'm sure you'll have the stat. We'll get into that, but they lost by 36 points. Perhaps the most interesting thing about this game was Giannis and Jrue and some of the comments they had after the game. I think that's going to key our conversation here today, particularly when it comes to the defense and some roster stuff. So we're going to get into that. Let's get started.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can hear and see me on this show daily and also find my work over at ESPN. Joining me from the Bucks Radio Network, co-host of this show at least once a week, a familiar voice and face, Justin Garcia. And we always thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of every single day. Now, we didn't have a post-game pod. Usually when we don't have a post-game pod, Justin, I start the tweets start rolling through and people are, where's the post-game pod? Why aren't you guys talking about it? Some stuff came up yesterday, but I think you can take a hint that there wasn't all that many people that were scrambling, searching, desperately looking for this post-game pod because the Bucks lost 136-100. Do you have the stat? Was that their biggest loss since how long are we talking here?
No, I mean, I did the same thing as you did last night where it was immediately you think, man, this is the worst loss since, oh, that's right. They were completely run off the floor in the second game of the season this year, where I think that Heat loss was 42. So,
oh, my God.
Yeah, I did the same thing last night where you're like, oh, that's right. It was that bad. So how soon we forget they had another loss like this year.
How much did they lose? When you said game two, I thought you were going to say game two against the Brooklyn Nets. I know that was playoffs, but how much did they lose? They were down by 48.
They were down by, 48 or 49. Yeah. I think they ended up losing by high 20s in that. Maybe it was like 30 something. But, yeah, it was nearly 50 at one point in that game.
All right, so we can get into the post-game stuff when we're going to. Again, there was really interesting comments from Giannis, interesting comments from Jrue related to the defense. But Mike Budenholzer after this game, let's just say that, he's always pretty short and sharp after the Bucks lose. There's no doubt about this. But I think there was a little bit of extra sting in his tail in this press conference. Should we say that? There was some one-word answers. He just had a general look of being pissed off on his face. He was not happy at all. I think a lot of that extended to, obviously the scoreboard, but what contributed to that, and whether it was the effort levels, whether it was the eye test, the desire of this team to really scrap this game out once they sort of fell behind early. But for those that have watched Nikola Jokic against the Bucks, for those that have watched the Denver Nuggets a couple of times at 5-4 and play, I wouldn't say that I was completely stunned that this is the way it panned out. They were 23 for 43 from three yesterday. Jokic had the 15 assists. Go back to 2020, they were 22 for 46 from three. Jokic had the 9 assists in that game. Let's just be real. Nikola Jokic destroys the Bucks. He does. He rips them apart every single time. He's such a unique player. He's had some just monster games against his team.
Yeah, he had 8 assists in the first quarter, I think, and that's only the second time in his career he's had an 8-assist quarter. You had to really pay attention because he came out with like 2 minutes left in the first quarter, and he sat for the first half of the second quarter, too, that you kept looking to think, when is Michael Malone going to bring Jokic back? So I think that was the only thing that deterred him from getting a triple-double in this game. And by halftime, because remember, he did that the final time these two teams played at the Bradley Center. You were probably at the game where Giannis had a triple-double as well, but Jokic had a triple-double by halftime. So we've seen him have quite a bit of success against the Bucks in the last, 4 or 5 years. He just had everything he wanted. And, we heard, and you alluded to the comments that Jrue and Giannis made after the game. Some of that reminded you a little bit of some of the commentary we heard last year early in the season after the Jazz game and the Mavericks game too, where Jrue Holiday really started to push for, hey, we got to switch more, and I'm comfortable doing this, and this is how you have to defend some of these teams. and gradually the Bucks started to do that. We heard Jrue and Giannis both basically saying we can't double Nikola Jokic, and I think the most perplexing thing was they were just caught in no man's land all night. Whereas you watched it, you thought, okay, if you're going to double him, you have to aggressively do it and do it early so he doesn't have time to find the open man and already see what's starting to set up around him. That the Bucks just kind of went through with a half-hearted approach to it, that if you're going to do that, and again, Wesley Matthews, for as good as he's been, if Wesley Matthews is who's defending Nikola Jokic, and I understand you don't have Brook Lopez, you don't have a whole lot of depth at the center position, but if Wesley Matthews and Jrue are the primary defenders, he's a 7-footer. He's going to be able to find what he wants over those guys. And then if you're delayed and double teaming, it's just going to lead to open shots. And that's what we saw all night. So they did neither of what you have to do. You either have to aggressively trap him and double him early, or just play him straight up. And that's basically what we heard Jrue especially say after the game last night.
So Jokic finished this one with 18 points, 9 rebounds, 15 assists. He only needed to play 28 minutes. Giannis did have the 29 points, 9 rebounds. So, he got his numbers in the end of this game. But I think if you were looking at this game as a Bucks fan, if you care about the MVP battle, let's just say the points went to Nikola Jokic in this one. There's no question about that. He might be the front runner right now. Jokic, I know Embiid's playing really well at this point as well. But, I'm not, if you care about that, not a great night for Giannis in terms of where he stands going up against another big man. He spent some time defending Jokic as well. But I don't, it's interesting. There was just one play that, I was watching this game, and every time there was any type of screen action involving Jokic, to me, I don't know what it was, whether they were kind of confused, whether they were just generally displeased with the coverage, or they weren't completely locked into the game. But there was an incredible amount of breakdowns. And the one play that stands out to me is in the first quarter. It was in the first few minutes. Jokic, and there was a ball handler, had the ball. He goes around the Jokic screen, and you had Bobby Portis and the Bucks guard. I'm trying to think who it was now.
I think it was Grayson Allen.
Grayson Allen, it was.
Yeah.
And then they both just, with the ball handler there, he just flicks the ball back to Jokic at the top of the key. All of a sudden, Giannis feels like he needs to dive out to Jokic on the perimeter. He lunged at Jokic, and Jokic is like, all right, I'm just going to flick this look away, one hand, left-handed pass to JaMychal Green. He finished the layup, and it's like, all right, well, if you're going to get defenders out of position, and I think this was the point that both Giannis and Jrue were making, the second you have someone even slightly out of position defensively, Jokic is just going to find the guy. Like, you can't give him that option. In that instance, you almost would prefer, well, you may as well shoot the three. We'll give you a little bit of space. We can't give you the opportunity to find a guy under the basket there. So I'm not sure whether they were trying to play drop coverage on the ball handler, whether they were trying to double the ball handler in that situation, whether they were supposed to switch and Bobby Portis forgot. I'm not sure, but there was a lot of that throughout the whole night. And yeah, not a banner night for the Bucks defense. Let's say that.
Well, and there was a couple of instances as well with I don't remember if it was the sequence you were talking about or later on in the second quarter, where it seemed like it just happened a handful of times that the Bucks defenders, they just got caught flat-footed and just watching the ball and watching what Nikola Jokic was doing. Chris Middleton was victimized on it, on I think a JaMychal Green play where he cut to the basket when it was 2 or 3 passes after Jokic caught it, that you just can't do it when they're moving it that much. And it was kind of reminiscent of playing the Warriors, how much the Nuggets were always moving off the ball. And I think that's what jumps out to you the most when you rewatch portions of that game or all the game is to the point that Giannis and Chris were making afterwards. Nikola Jokic was never looking to initiate offense in terms of scoring. Every time he caught the ball, he was immediately looking to pass. And it's almost as though Denver saw, here's what the Bucks are going to do. They're going to try and somewhat double team you. So as soon as you catch the ball, just look for an open man and he'll be there. And that's what Jokic was doing all night. So there was nothing you could point to and say, well, the Bucks at least did this well, that the defense was just a total disaster. They were crushed on the boards again. And, the thing that's really stood out to me the most in this month, but especially the last week, is they've had a lot of turnovers. And early in the month, you could explain it with all of the issues they had in the backcourt. I mean, you didn't have George Hill last night, but you were down Grayson Allen at times. You were down George Hill. You were down Jrue Holiday. And we saw the strain that put when Giannis and Chris basically had to do everything offensively. So you could kind of explain some of the turnover issues, but these, 2 times now in the last week, you've had those 3 guys on the floor and you lost. So 2 of your 5 losses with them have come in the last, 7 days here. I think it's 78 points off of turnovers in the last 3 games that the opponents have scored, which is not great. Yeah, I can see the facial reaction you made. 3 straight games where the opponents had 20 or more points, and the only one of those games you won was against the lowly Knicks.
That's tough. That's not a great stat. I would say a lot of the times for a team that tries to foul a low amounts of times, but it's one of Bud's big things, and also turnovers. He probably could contribute to why he wasn't too happy, and it's a bit of an unusual circumstance. But people think unusual circumstances mean complicated taxes. So we're talking about taxes now. The Bucks owners, they know a little bit about taxes at the moment, but for TurboTax Live experts, that's what makes things interesting. We all have unique lives, whether you have invested in crypto for the first time this year, own an up-and-coming small business, or are raising rambunctious twins. I'm certainly not in that category. Luckily, TurboTax Live has experts who can answer your tax questions, walk you through the whole process, or do your taxes for you from start to finish. They help you get every deduction you deserve, no matter your unique situation, and you can talk to a TurboTax Live expert through your phone or computer without leaving your house. TurboTax Live experts are here to help you however you need, and if you need an extra hand your taxes off to them, and they'll do it all for you. So TurboTax Live experts, to them, an interesting life can mean an even greater refund. Visit turbotax.com to learn more. You do your thing. They've got your taxes. That's TurboTax Live. New ad read there. Just good to get through it. But I'll tell you what isn't a new ad read. That's friends at rockauto.com. They've been sponsoring the podcast for a long time, and with the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure after pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and then wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing only the brands their warehouse might happen to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. So save the time, save the money. You can save up to 30%, 50%, even 100% more for the same parts that you would get in a chain auto chain store, and you can do it right at home on the website. The prices are reliably low for everyone. So just go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Just write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box today? Now we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. So we are just over a week away from the trade deadline, and Locked On will have you covered with the trade deadline show. I'm not sure how much the Bucks are going to be involved in the trade deadline, but check it out. You'll see it on all our Twitter feeds. You'll be able to get it on YouTube, the Locked On YouTube channel. So make sure you check it out. That's the trade deadline show. We might talk a little bit about trades later on this episode because Giannis did have an interesting comment in this press conference. But let's stick with the defensive comments from Giannis and Jrue. So you've already hit on it. They basically both said that they believe that they should have just defended Jokic one-on-one, made him score. It reminded me going back a few years ago, because Jrue Holiday specifically brought up Kevin Durant, and he said, look, no disrespect to Nikola Jokic, but he's not going to score like that man. And he didn't say Kevin Durant, but he was talking about him. He said, we took him to 7 games. We've all heard PJ Tucker talk about it. Look, we've said it. Durant averaged 37 points in this series. His efficiency was incredible. He had an amazing series. But PJ Tucker still gets all the credit for the grinding, for the scrapping, for the physical play. And so the Bucks do have a blueprint in that scenario. So you can understand why they would say, why are you giving the chance for arguably the best passer in the game to have all these open windows, these open lanes to pass? So I totally understand it. It reminded me when I was first getting into the media game, Justin, and longtime listeners of the podcast will remember this. But, for most people, certainly for me, when you get the opportunity to talk to these NBA players for the first time, it's a pretty nerve-wracking experience. You get a little bit nervous. You're like, what should I say? Am I going to sound like an idiot? I was in San Francisco. The Bucks were playing the Warriors. and they used to practice at this place, the Olympic Club. It's a very fancy facility in the middle of San Francisco. Not the type of place that I would ever be allowed in the doors under typical circumstances. You got these rich people, they're in there, they're just trotting along on the treadmill, looking ridiculous. And the basketball venue is just beautiful, like glass from floor to ceiling. Anyway, fantastic place to go. So I walk in there. The only two players I knew were Daly and Thon Maker. I was comfortable talking to those guys. They knew who I was. It's fine. I can talk to them. Anyone else, very nervous. I'd never asked Giannis a question in my life at that point, any of those guys. But you can just sort of go up to the players and talk to them. So I saw Jason Terry sitting over there. I'm like, all right, I'll go talk to the Jet, see what he's got to say. And I asked him a similar question about guarding Kevin Durant. And to be honest, I think he did think I was a bit of an idiot. He's like, who's this Australian guy coming over and asking this ridiculous question? And he said, what do you think? Like, he said, you think you can actually stop Kevin Durant? It's like, you can't stop Kevin Durant. Stop everyone else. Make him score. They got to get their points from somewhere. And it's kind of the same type of thing with Jokic. Like, think about it. What's the most he's going to score in a game? 50 points? 55 points? 60? I mean, it would be an incredible individual performance. They're still going to need to get 50 points from other players. And if they're shooting contested shots, obviously that's the theory. That's the idea here. The thing with Jokic is, though, that there is no player in the league that is like Nikola Jokic, and the Bucks only see this man twice a season. I was listening to a number of people talk about the way the Cavs kind of dismantled the Bucks last week, and there is a theory out there from some people that over the course of a 7-game series, the Cavs might be able to be beat. But when you only see a team that is so unique in the way that they play a tall lineup and a one-off regular season game, it can be like, what the hell are we playing against? Yeah. And Jokic is like the individual form of that. So first of all, I'm not dismissing the way the Bucks played yesterday or dismissing the defense. But I don't know. I mean, if you wanted to look at it on a positive lens, you could say, well, the Bucks probably know in a 7-game series, if they got to the NBA Finals and were playing Jokic, they would probably have to defend him differently. They can't continue to do that. Were they trying some things? I don't know. It just looked like terrible defense to me. But we have seen this team through last year try different things, have extreme struggles. And then things tightened up towards the postseason. I don't know what the benefit would have been other than winning that game. When you look at the standings, the Bucks probably need to start winning some games. Would you go with that approach? Like, I can understand why the players were frustrated, and I don't know if this makes any sense. But in terms of going the approach that you would probably go in the postseason in a regular season game like this and say, okay, well, let's make Jokic score 60 in a random January. How did you read into all the frustration from the players?
I don't know. That's last year it was an easier takeaway. I think that what we referenced earlier in the show with Jrue Holiday specifically talking about, hey, we got to switch more, we got to do this. That was easy to see. Okay, here's the frustration of we're trying to figure out how all of these new pieces fit in. Here's what Jrue's comfortable with doing, and here's what we can all kind of see of you got to switch. They have the personnel for it. They should be doing this more, and why are they so resistant on it? When I looked at this game and you listened to some of those comments afterwards, I think it was just partially a self-own and frustration, but also somewhat similar, but mostly just we're seeing the frustration seep out of whether or not this is a team saying we're going to coast through the regular season. We saw that we can do this last year. There's no need to overexert yourself in the regular season or not. I think part of it was just frustration of they look at their lot in the Eastern Conference and say, we should be better than this. And especially when you look at the month of January, it's kind of, is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? Where as you look through the Eastern Conference, Philadelphia won tonight without Joel Embiid. So I think they go 12-3 in January. The Sixers are 12-3. The Cavs go 11-3. Those are the only two teams in that contending range that played well in January. The Bucks were 7-8. It's the first losing full month they've had under Coach Budenholzer. The Nets were 6-10. The Bulls were 500. The Heat were okay. I think they were 9-5 or 9-6. But you look at the East and you say, okay, is it a good thing that we struggled and went 7-8 when it seems like everybody else struggled too? Or is this a bad thing where you look at it and you say, man, we really had a chance to jump back towards the top or in the top of the conference and add some separation. And we let that slip by. And we can't play with fire here that this conference is still ridiculous, where it's separated by you have to get to, I think, 13 before a team is 10 games or more out of first place. And it's just 4.5 separating 1 through 6 right now, that it's or 1 through 7. It's insane. So I think part of it is frustration too, that they know January was a pretty good opportunity for us, especially with the amount of home games and the schedule that we had. And we had a losing record. It gets much more difficult in the back half of February, and especially in March, where not only do we play a lot of good teams, they're mostly road games. So I think it was mostly a lot of frustration from themselves and just from the position that they're in that started to seep through after the game.
So, and Frank tweeted this. I think he tweeted it during the game. It's a shame the All-Star break is 3 weeks away. That might be right, because the Bucks do look like a team that need a little bit of a break. But when you try and decipher what that frustration means, I'm kind of torn, and I'm kind of split down the middle, whether I think that there was some frustration at the way they were being told to defend, or there's frustration with the way they executed. Because to me, watching that game, I'm not sure I'm willing to say, yeah, it was Bud's fault, or yeah, it was the players' fault.
Yeah.
I think combined, everyone probably walked away from that one and said, okay, that's not the way we want to be playing basketball. But I do think when we talk about this team needing a break, needing a rest, I think there's some relevant stuff. Giannis said something interesting regarding the team and the makeup of the team. So we're going to get to that after I talk about Bet Online. There might be less football being played, but betonline.net, that's betonline.net, has way more odds and info for this playoff season. Of course, there's only one football game left. But from the scores, the totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline is the number one spot for all things NFL betting moving forward. And it's not just football. BetOnline.net's basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC odds coverage is the best in the business. From sports right down to your favorite Vegas casino games, BetOnline is your number one wagering destination. That's BetOnline, the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports and play your favorite games. BetOnline, where the game starts. Giannis was asked post-game about the lack of bigs on the roster. And he basically bluntly said, well, yeah, me and Bobby are the only bigs on the roster. And again, he declared his desire for Brook Lopez to return to this team coming forward. But we are only a week and a half away from the trade deadline. Of course, there is some strong thought, for obvious reasons, given the Bucks' lack of trade assets, that potentially the actual roster add might come after that period in the buyout market and things of that nature. But we do, and look, many people scoffed at the Lakers last year when they talked about fatigue, including myself, and a lot of that is just fun because it's fun to scoff at the Lakers when they're struggling, let's be honest. But Giannis did hint to the fact that it's starting to get hard work. You know, you're at the end of January, we're moving into February now as we're recording this podcast. He's been asked to play more center than ever before in his career. He's been asked to defend guys that he hasn't had to before. We've all marveled at his work as the kind of the freelancer on defense that can be the help guy, the best help guy in the entire league. But the physicality of what he's been asked to do this season, I do think, is starting to take a toll, and probably also on Bobby Portis, who's playing a role that, to an extent, that he hasn't had to before. We have a YouTube commenter. I don't have the YouTube name. I should have done that. But he's been jumping in the comments multiple times over the last week saying, Giannis isn't playing enough. He needs to play more minutes. Look at the other superstars in the league. And I haven't responded because, to me, that idea that Giannis should be playing more is a very funny one, given you consider the load that they've had, the shortened off season that they played, the fact that he is carrying injuries. We know that, including knee soreness that he gets through every game, the physicality he plays for. The last thing you want to be doing if you're Milwaukee is playing this guy more, I think. And that's where the delicate balance of what this team is trying to achieve this year is going to come into it, because I don't think it's simply the Bucks deciding we can coast. I think that we are seeing a team that is starting to struggle with the nightly grind of bringing it every single night, particularly when they don't have the reliability of Brook Lopez on the defensive end, who's been the Iron Man that's been there every single night. So you mentioned the 7-8 record in January. The Bucks were 16th in offense, 16th in defense. Their net rating was basically flat.
Yeah.
Negative 0.2, I believe it was. But unlike the start of the season, where all the metrics said that as long as Giannis was on the floor, this was a dominant team, it wasn't the case in January. They played 431 minutes. The net rating was just plus 2 points. So it's not what it was in double digits at the start of the season. But the defensive stuff is a concern. Jrue Holiday in January, the team's defensive rating was 109. With Jrue on the floor, it was 114. Yeah. So I think it's something to keep a watch on. I think Frank's right. I wish the All-Star break was coming up here in a week, even though Giannis tries too hard in the All-Star game anyway. Not too hard. We enjoy it, but you know what I mean. He might not get the rest we need, but this team does look like it needs a rest. And yeah, of course, they probably need another big man to help facilitate that. But it's something to watch, and I think it's a very real reason for some of the games you might look at and say, geez, the Bucks look like they're coasting. Are they coasting, or are they just tired?
I don't think they're coasting. It's. I think the question is more: are you more concerned, or do you have more panic, or is it more frustration when you're watching what this team is doing? For me, it's still frustration more so than panic. There's a little bit of concern, and that concern basically just revolves around Brook Lopez and when he can get back. Because as we've seen here, yes, Giannis is going to play a lot, especially at center in the playoffs, but you need to be able to get there, and you need to have a plan B, even if it's only for 7 minutes. And we've seen Bobby Portis can't be the only plan B, that you're going to have to play teams differently in the postseason. So that would be the only piece of concern I have. I did see some other people referencing, it was right around the same time last year that we really started to see some struggles with this team. And that's when some of those comments started to come out too, of this team needs to switch more. And they were tinkering with some things defensively. This isn't necessarily the same. Where last year you could see they're playing zone more. And I know they've played zone more this year, but they were trying it for the first time last year. They were switching more and they were doing things differently. So that kind of spoke to, here's some of the growing pains they're going through. And oh, by the way, 50% of the roster was new. This year, you had most of the same guys coming back. The big wrench that was thrown in there is now figure out how to play a majority of the season, all of the season basically, without Brook Lopez. When coming into the year, we said, I feel pretty good about the talent, but the only concern you would have is there's not a whole lot of depth in the front court. So if they have an injury, they could be in trouble there. And we've seen no Brook all year. Giannis and Bobby have gone down. So I don't think it's a case of them coasting. And especially when you see some things that they've always dominated, they're really struggling at. In January, I think they only won the rebounding battle 6 times in those 15 games, that they were out-rebounded. I think their team percentage was 48%, which is just insane when you see what they've done. Traditionally under Bud, defensive rebounding's been terrible. They've never been great except for last year on the offensive glass, but they've been really bad defensively on the glass. And again, this just magnifies how important Brook Lopez is there. That as soon as he arrived, we would talk about the impact he makes on rebounding. And if you weren't familiar with him, you'd just look at the box scores and you'd say, he has 6 rebounds a night. How can he be that good? But then you saw Giannis's numbers rise, and the Bucks routinely had around 80% rebounding rate on the defensive glass. And this year they've been at like 70%. So I don't think it's a matter of coasting. I think it's been some personnel issues. The playoffs are going to be different. And it's kind of what we learned the last couple of years, that, yeah, you're great in the regular season, but there's some things you can do differently in the playoffs. And I do think that's an advantage that the Bucks have, that I would still take that trio, even if Brook doesn't play, over a majority of these teams that we're seeing catch and leapfrog the Bucks. But again, you still got to get there, and you have to be able to throw different looks out there. And the thing we've noticed this year is, as this roster is presently constructed, they basically just have one style that they can play. Last year, you played multiple different ways. This year, that hasn't been the case.
It's going to be a fascinating few weeks to see where this all plays out, and then moving ahead to see where Brook Lopez is. But, I think last year I spent most of the season saying, I think this team's pretty good. I'm not convinced they can win a title, though, because winning a title is really, really effing hard. I feel the same this year. I think that they can win it. I think it's going to be really, really hard. And if I was a betting man, I would say they probably won't. Hopefully they prove me wrong again, but it's going to be an interesting a couple of months here. And like most teams, as we're seeing, he rattled off some of the records for these teams. There isn't a lot of room for error for not just the records, but in terms of health, in terms of what you can do lineup versatility wise. And once you get past the trade deadline and these rosters kind of cemented, then you got what you got, and you got to hope for a good run. So we'll see what the Bucks can do. But there's no doubt about it. They are in a rut right now. They got the Wizards tomorrow, Justin, or today, as people are listening or watching this. And speaking about a team in a rut, you don't want to lose to the Wiz. You do not want to lose to the Wiz. They're 23-26. They've lost 5 in a row. They look awful. We'll see.
No Bradley Beal, so that I don't know if that's good or bad, because again, the Bucks have struggled against those teams in the 9 through 15 range in the conference, or 9 through 13 range.
Okay, well, I think it's still good. As Beal averaging 75 points per game against the Bucks in recent years, so
it's up there. But Chris has played well against the Wizards too, so maybe this is another Chris Middleton coming out party. I'm with you though. I feel very similar to how I felt last year. Obviously, PJ Tucker just changed everything for the team last season. But look, there's still one of the 2 or 3 teams you'd say, okay, this is one of the 5 teams you'd point to and say, this is probably one of these 5 groups of teams, or 5 teams, is who's going to win the title this year. And I still put them in that mix. I don't want to undersell Brooklyn for the same reasons we're saying about the Bucks here and some of these struggles they're going through. You're still going to have to defend Kevin Durant and Harden, and we think Kyrie Irving. Miami's, what we talked about at the end there, where the Bucks have really only been able to play one way. Miami can play different ways, so they continue to linger there and be a concern. But we had Tim Bontemps on our airwaves earlier tonight, Monday, when we recorded this. I don't know if he was just pandering to the Milwaukee market, but Tim Bontemps still said, look, I know they're struggling. I would still pick the Bucks to win the East and to win the title this year, but it's going to be a tight race.
That's what happens when you win a championship. All of a sudden, everyone thinks that you can win it, even if you don't. But we keep it real here on Locked On Bucks. And if you go back to the postseason run last year, you can find at least 3 occasions where we declared they probably aren't winning the title. And they still did. So it's only February 1. So I'm not willing to rule it out. But we'll see what comes over the next few weeks. It's a grind. If you want to bet on the Bucks, though, now might be a good time. Listen to our guys at the Locked On Bets podcast with your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. They'll have you covered for everything you need there. As always, anything we discussed on today's podcast, you can get me on Twitter. If you're watching on YouTube, which you should be, and subscribing, you can see it there at Kane Pittman. You've got at TMJ Garcia as well. So you can let us know your thoughts on anything we said today. Of course, the YouTube comments are always firing on all cylinders. Very passionate fans, which we love and appreciate. But the Bucks and the Wizards play tomorrow. We'll be back. There will be a post-game pod, so we will speak to you guys then. But for myself and for Justin, take it easy. We'll catch you guys after the game.